Okay, so thank you everyone here who has joined us. Today we will talk about dark web monitoring, focusing on ransomware and supply chain risks. My name is Avishag, I'm a product manager here at Webs, and joining me today is Yuval. Yuval is our senior cyber analyst at Webs. So before we actually dive into the interesting part, I would like to give you guys some background about Webs. Webs is a leading data provider. We transform any web content into accessible, comprehensive, and useful data for both humans and machines. In this webinar, we will demonstrate how dark web monitoring is crucial for tracing ransomware and supply chain risk. In order to do so, we're going to use Lunar. As you can see on the screen, Lunar is a dark web monitoring tool that gives comfortable access to research the dark web. This webinar is going to help organizations that are interested in tracing the dark web for external threats. We will talk about dark web monitoring. I'm going to give you guys a quick overview. Then we'll take a deep dive into analyst workflow to understand how dark web data is transforming to actionable intelligence. Then Yuval will show you a live demo of ransomware monitoring and supply chain, of course, using Lunar. And in case you have some questions, we will be having a short Q&A session at the end, so you're more than welcome to start typing out your questions, starting from now. So the first slide is the main threats on the dark web. Before I'm starting, I just want to say one sentence about the dark web. I'm sure all of you know, but the dark web is anonymous networks that malicious actors use for their illicit activities. Illicit activities is, of course, the general phrase. Actors actually use the dark web for many things. It can be dealing drugs and weapons, they use it to plan terror attack, and of course, they engage in hacking and data leakage, which is our focus today, of course. So let's go over the main threats on the dark web. Please notice, I mentioned the word main here. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to cyber threats. So the first and most well-known is the ransomware trend. This trend gained momentum in 2021 and is going strong until today. Just to understand how colossal the damage is, in 2021, 37% of all businesses and organizations were hit by ransomware. This actually cost the world $20 billion over the course of 2021. And I've actually read somewhere that this number is expected to rise by 2031 to $265 billion. So where can we find those ransomware groups? Ransomware groups are active on the dark web. This is where they publish their attacks and demand their ransom, and they set it up in the blogs. So with Webs, we track and monitor over 120 ransomware groups. This means that in average, between 1 to 2 ransomware groups emerges in 1 week. And just to understand the damage, each group can potentially generate dozens to hundreds of attacks. As you know, ransomware are fully automated by today. Important also to note that we also track those groups via hackers forums and chat groups, and they also take part in those places of the web as well. The second trend is also well known. All of you know it, data breaches. I'm going to give you some statistics that will not surprise anyone. During the first quarter of 2023, more than 6 million data records were exposed on the deep and dark web through data breaches. Data leaks, they actually can come in many forms and places. It can be a hacker that leaks a database on a dark web marketplace or on a database, or it can be a dark web marketplace that sells credentials that were stolen by a malware. The damage is, of course, huge, and a leaked data breach can lead to further data leaks. It's a never-ending cycle. Last but not least is the vulnerabilities exposure threats. Vulnerabilities is one of the main topics discussed in dark web sites and also in chat applications. We can see in marketplaces and forums, there is usually dedicated sections, especially for that. And additionally, on top of that, we can see in many blogs that are dedicated to vulnerabilities exposure alone. In those blogs, actors actually upload information about the vulnerability, how to exploit it, and to which company it belongs. So eventually tracking these external threats is crucial in order to prevent the next event. So before I'll move on to explaining about the challenges in the dark web, right after we understood the threats the dark web pose, I want to ask you a quick question. See if you guys are awake. How many of you know exposed.vc forum? There's actually a poll where we'll join. I see it's up. So feel free to answer. I'm actually curious about your questions, although I think I know what you will answer. Okay, I see that the result of the poll is 50-50. I'm actually kind of surprised because Exposed is kind of a new forum, but I think the 50 people that voted that they don't know Exposed do know RAID forums. So, oh, thank you that we see the result. Okay, so they do know RAID forums. So I want to share with you guys how the two are connected. And by explaining that, I will actually share with you why hackers forums are so challenging to track. So RAID forums was established in 2015. It was one of the most popular hackers forums that was known to be one of the first places hackers published their data breaches in, right before it's ending up in the news. So in 2022, after 7 years, the founder of RAID got arrested, the site was seized, but not long after, the next generation of RAID appeared. It was a new hackers forum called Breached. Breached didn't last more than a year. After 10 months, it got shut. But a couple of months ago, Exposed has emerged again, officially replacing Breached, which was officially replacing RAID. There was some drama in between. Breached used to change their domain. And from that short story, we learned that actually dark web sites, or deep web sites in this case, are not stable at all. It's really hard to track a site that is that unstable. On top of that, these sites are untraceable. They're not being indexed in any search engines, traditional search engines such as Google or Bing, the deep web. Another challenge that we face when trying to monitor those sites is protection. This can be both digital and human. Digital meaning Cloudflare, for example, and antibots, for example. And by saying human protection, I mean admin control. The admins on those sites are very, very strict, and they're doing everything they can in order to keep us out of those sites. And we have to maintain active avatars and active users in order to stay on top of things. Last but not least, the biggest challenge I think everyone here relates, noisy data, vast amount of messy data from different multiple sources, and the analyst's job is to find the needle in the haystack. So I'm not sure if you guys are awake again. I'm going to give you another poll. How many here is using dark web monitoring tool in their organizations? Again, 50-50. It's really interesting with you guys. So after we understood the main type of threats in the dark web and just how hard it is to find them, let's talk about why it's so important to track and monitor the dark web. What can we actually use this data for? So I'm going to break up this slide into 3 parts. Before a data breach occurs, during a data breach, and after a data breach. How can we use this information in those 3 situations? So with dark web monitoring, we can actually detect early indications for attack. For example, we can see hackers discussing and mentioning domains, IPs, and they relate them to vulnerabilities and companies, of course. All of those can indicate a future attack. Sometimes we will be even able to prevent an attack by doing the simple act of changing a leaked password or maybe updating our system in the case of CVE. During an attack, sometimes a company might get attacked and they might not even know about it. Their employees are not in those hidden places that are so hard to reach, and they might find about it from the news. So monitoring the dark web in real time can help the organization to minimize the damage as much as they can. And after attack has occurred, sometimes the dark web can help us understand what happened, and we can investigate and see some clues. It might help for the future. And also track data leaks, super important, making sure if it's your data leak or your customer database data leak, changing passwords as soon as possible, letting the customers know, and all of that. I'm not saying anything new here. So now we've talked about main threats, challenges, how the data can help, but how helpful data can turn into actionable intelligence. I want to talk with you guys about workflow of CTI analysts, cyber threat intelligence analysts. What do they do to produce intelligence from this messy, challenging data? So what they do is, in a high level, they discover, investigate, and monitor. So let's break it up. The analyst will start with discovery, meaning what they don't know, they don't even know. Let's say I want to discover new threats about Microsoft. I don't know which Microsoft vulnerabilities are discussed on the dark web at all. But once I discover them, I have a list of vulnerabilities, so I can start investigate them. I can find out which one are mentioned the most and pose a higher risk. I can learn how hackers plan to exploit them, or I can learn which are the main threat actors I need to track. Talking about tracking, leading me to my next step, I need to monitor. I will monitor relevant actors closely, checking if they've posted anything more than once a day, making sure I'm receiving real-time information about their activities. Those will turn into actionable intelligence, of course, but sometimes they might turn into discovery, process, investigation. Again, this workflow is very demanding. It's an ongoing job. It's hard, and gaining important data in a sea of messy data and making sure it's fast enough, it's quite complicated. So following that, we try to simplify it. Now that we understand the analyst workflow, when monitoring the dark web, we can demonstrate in actual use case, which I'm reminding you, ransomware and supply chain risk. This is the use cases that we will demonstrate today, demonstrate everything I have been saying until now. So we will use Lunar to do it, our dark web monitoring tool. Lunar simply reflects dark web data that Webs has collected, of course, in real time. Think of all the sources I mentioned and how challenging it is to find and track them. In Lunar, all of them are available. Additionally to that, Lunar also includes functions that can help the analyst to investigate and monitor the data better. So, excuse me, to understand what functions I'm talking about, let's see how we can streamline the workflow we talked about before by using Lunar. I'm going to go over the analyst workflow and demonstrate it with Lunar functionalities. Right after this slide, Yuval will take the lead. She will show you a live demo and demonstrate all of the functions I'm talking about. So I'll go over it quickly. To discover new threats, the analyst can use a query builder and an AI query generator. Writing a comprehensive query, I'm sure all of you know it here, it can take us, an analyst, about half an hour. And with an AI's help, it can reduce it, I think, to 5 minutes. AI can also help the analyst to think of new directions they haven't thought about throughout the discovery process. Moving on to investigation. The analyst can analyze a threat much faster when they have data timeline available and also the top sources list. They can take just a quick glance at the data and gain an instant insight, of course, primary insight, but it would really take hours of work to figure it out without segmented data coming to you so easily. The Lunar also has a filters list. This can help the analyst to exclude noise and find the most relevant posts easily. Finally, when the investigation yields insights, the analyst can define an alert that would help them to track automatically their subject matter. The notification that they will be receiving can start a new investigation, discovery process, again, never-ending job. So yes, Yuval, take the lead. Excited to show you guys Lunar.
Thanks, Avishad, for that great overview of the dark web and the challenges monitoring it. Now let's shift our focus to Lunar and explore how it addresses analysts' needs for a more user-friendly and a streamlined view of the dark web in their day-to-day job and life. As mentioned, Lunar was designed by analysts for analysts to simplify our work by offering various investigation and discovery features, making it a lot easier, faster, and efficient to reach our conclusions. To show this, we'll take a case study that demonstrates how analysts can use it to investigate a supply chain risk in which a brand suffered a ransomware attack, and that put another brand's users at risk. So what is a supply chain risk? It's one of the most common approaches the analysts use these days to search for threat posed at their customer, only they don't focus on the customer, but on their third parties, meaning on their supply chain. So different affiliates and partners and vendors. In this case, I'll be the analyst, and I was given a task by my threat team, my threat intelligence team lead, to find threats to my customer, which in this case is First Bank, an American bank, which gives worldwide services. And instead of focusing on First Bank, I'll start by focusing on its supply chain to find any kind of risks posed to them. And by that connecting it to threats that might be posed at First Bank too. Meaning my direct mission would be finding immediate external threats to third parties, which I can later on connect to First Bank and see some kind of a concrete risk to them. The background and the need to all this is obviously the fact that we see more and more hacking attacks, and specifically ransomware attacks on the dark web. They've been discussed, they've been traded, they're everywhere, and we want to be proactive and provide this actionable data for our customers before they actually face any kind of threat. So, as Avishag mentioned before, we'd always start by discovering. In this specific case, I'll start by mapping the different parties and partners that collaborate and work day to day with First Bank. Later on, I'll monitor them one by one to search their domains on Lunar to see if any of those were mentioned on the dark web in relation to some kind of risk. If a risk of a kind was found, I would try to investigate that kind of risk and understand what can I actually do with it. And later on, act and go back to my customer, reporting to him and suggesting what I believe he should do to prevent the threat. So it just happens that I already did the first step for us all, and I prepared the first list I'd go with to search the different partners that collaborate with First Bank. So we'll go over them one by one to check if any of them were perhaps mentioned on the dark web in relation to some kind of threat. We'll do it by using their domains, as that's one of the first practices we can use to demonstrate and search for very narrowed data that's at risk. And let's start. So I'm very happy to finally show you Lunar and introduce it. We'll see it in a sec. And using it at first, we'll use a very, very basic query, searching for specifically the domain of VeriSign, which is the first company in list that we saw. VeriSign specifically provides First Bank with SSL technology services, which allows First Bank to encrypt their transactions online. In this case, I'll search for their domain with any combination of the mention of my customer, First Bank. I'll run it 6 months back, and I couldn't find anything. Well, that could have been too easy, couldn't it? So perhaps I'll try something else. If me as an analyst right now, I want to try different practices, I can either use Lunar's AI tool and ask for it to help me to build a different query. But in this specific case, I believe removing First Bank's mention and even removing the domain filter, meaning focusing my search only on the brand's name, VeriSign, would do. So I'll run this query half a year back, and I immediately see some very important insights for me as an analyst that can allow me focus and narrow my data and searches. So the first thing would obviously be the graph of discussions during the past 6 months of the dark web. So these were all the mentions of this specific query. In this case, the word VeriSign, the past 6 months, and this peak during April might be very, very interesting. Another thing I can see are the top sources on which VeriSign was mentioned. I can start looking at the posts here that are automatically retrieved to me by relevancy methods. But I will say that just from a quick view, I can see that nothing here seems too risky. I don't see any IOCs. I don't see any threats that pop up to my eyes. And I might want to change this a bit just to adjust the query or the search to what I'm looking for. So as we said earlier, we're looking for risks. I'll go to the risk score, which is under the dynamic filters, different filters we can narrow the data by using. I'll try using a risk score.
Yuval, you got
Yeah.
broken up. Maybe repeat the last sentence.
Sorry for that. So where exactly did you guys lose me?
when you talked about that, when you start talking about the results, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so in order to narrow down my results and make them a bit more approachable for me as an analyst, instead of me needing to go over 100 results, I'll use Lunar's filters, and in this specific case, the risk score, as I'm interested in the most risky posts in order to narrow the data down. So I'll choose the highest risk score we provide to assess risk. And by 2 clicks, I narrowed my data and my posts from 100-something posts to only 9. Now, what we see here are several posts retrieved from Russian market, which is an auto shop that offers for sale different stolen data entities, meaning credit cards, emails, cookies, and whatnot. In this specific case, I get an indication that VeriSign or VeriSign's domain is offered for sale here, and that's a risk. But that doesn't show me a risk to my company or my customer First Bank. It shows me a risk is posed to VeriSign. I can't see any connection or any relation to First Bank here yet, and that might mean I should go back to my original list and try searching once again with a different vendor. So going back, I'll now go back to the list, and my second vendor in list is Guardian Analytics. Guardian Analytics provides managed detection and response service to First Bank, and using the exact same practice, I'll try searching for Guardian Analytics on Lunar in relation to any kind of risk posed to it. So once again, we hop over to Lunar, and in this case, I won't use only the Guardian Analytics domain mention. I'll use it either with perhaps or just as a domain, or the brand's name Guardian Analytics alone. Once again, I'll go 6 months back, and running the query, I get almost 3,000 results, which is great as an analyst who likes data, but I have no idea where to start from. So obviously, I'll first go to the usage and discussion graph I see on the dark web. Perhaps July is where I should focus on, or the different dark web platforms, which I see either the domain or the brand name was mentioned on. So I see here different hacking forums and data stores and perhaps chat applications such as Telegram. And this gives me a better view of where it was mentioned in the dark web, which is obviously full of different sources, as Avishag mentioned before, and all are very unstable. So the first thing I can see here, only by looking at the first 3 results, is that all 3 came from ransomware blogs. Ransomware blogs is a type of site, or it's actually the official websites that are activated by different ransomware gangs. In this specific case, the first 2 posts were posted on Daxian Team's official ransomware website, and the third one was posted on Lockbit Gang official website. Now, these 2 ransomware groups are very known, very popular, very active on the dark web. And what we actually see here is a clear announcement made first on January by Daxian and second on February by Lockbit, saying loud and clear, guys, we attacked Guardian Analytics. Now, obviously, we know that once a domain or a brand such as Guardian Analytics suffered a ransomware attack, that leads to further attacks. It could lead to phishing methods and activity. It can lead to future data breaches that we see once hackers use the data that was breached here. And now I can already tell that a vendor that works with my customer, First Bank, was at risk, that might put First Bank at risk too. Now, I see this first indication, but just for me to be as efficient as I can and sure as I can as an analyst, I'll narrow this down only to searches by domain, because I want to make sure that I search the digital assets, as hackers usually use those when mentioning threats to a domain. So running only the domain, the same time back, half a year, I go down from tons and tons of results to only 4. Now, this is a reasonable amount of data I can go over and very easily get my conclusions from. So once again, the first post was the original and official announcement made by Daxian Team on their official website. Now, if I scroll slightly down, I see another post retrieved from Telegram, and not only from Telegram, but from a Telegram bot channel. This Telegram bot channel is called Ransomware Watcher. And searching specifically for Guardian, I'll see that aside to other domains, it reports on a daily basis that were attacked by Lockbit and Dakeson and other ransomware groups. It actually reports that Guardian Analytics was actually attacked by Lockbit. So I already have a double indication and a very strong indication to the fact that Guardian Analytics, a vendor of my customer, was attacked, suffered a data breach that could lead to First Bank's data being out there on the dark web and at risk too. Now that I have this, I can go on and search any connections, relations between what I just found and First Bank. So I'll take the exact same practice and I'll search for the domain value of First Bank. I'll search for First Bank half a year back. I get almost 200 results. Once again, I can tell a lot of them were mentioned on Russian market. Excuse me for being so familiar with all the clumsy URLs, but I know them very well. So Russian market and other hacking forums and Telegram, which is very interesting because I can assume that the potential of data breaches resulting from those two ransomware attacks that Guardian Analytics suffered could be exposed and shown here in the dark web using Lunar. Now, another thing I can tell is, since I know I'm looking for specific indicators I can report back to my customer, perhaps I'll focus this whole search only on data that's retrieved from our data breach detection product. Running it, I go down from 200 results to 61, and these aren't only posts, these are actual emails that were compromised as part of data breaches, which potentially happened as a result of those two ransomware attacks that Guardian Analytics worked with. Once that happened, their data was out there, and perhaps their customers or their users' data, such as First Bank, were out there too, and here's a clear indication to that. So going back to what we went over here, now I can go back to my customer and say, hey, I have two very strong indications that I want to share with you. The first one is that Guardian Analytics, which you work with on a daily basis, suffered two ransomware attacks. Two different ransomware groups targeted it during 2023. And as a result of that, they suffered a data breach. Perhaps your users were breached, or your entities were breached as part of that. Maybe you should reevaluate your interface with them. Another thing I can tell him is that there were actually compromised emails that I found on the dark web, and there might be others there that are recycled from one to another data breach, and I might find in 2 or 3 days once again, and perhaps he needs to block them and make sure that they're inaccessible for hackers to get unauthorized access and generate further attacks of phishing method attacks and whatnot. So, Avishad, going back to you.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a high-level conclusions, not something too long. We learned today that the dark web is a valuable source for intelligence about potential cyber threats. Tracking those threats can help companies to reduce the risk of a cyber attack and even prevent an attack in some cases. Using Lunar, you can simplify the process by making the data accessible and easy to navigate. So thank you very much for joining us. This is the end of the webinar and the beginning of the QA session. So feel free to send any questions in the chat. We've actually received 2 questions already. So I'm going to read you guys them, and then we'll go over if there's any more. So one of the challenging problems in the dark web is to constantly track new sources that are relevant for threat intelligence and data breaches. How do you cope with it? I think, Yuval, you should take the lead here, as this is your entire job.
Okay, so that's actually a great question. Thanks for that. We stay up to date with all the new evolving sources on the dark web with several proactive approaches. The first one would be the ongoing automatic discovery process, which we have running in the background as we speak. It's very relevant for dark web sources that change all the time. And for instance, Telegram, which we gave as an example, millions of channels and millions of users join it on a daily basis, and we make sure we're there to find the relevant new chats and groups and add them if they're relevant. Another approach is, or another method is our analysts, my team and myself. We investigate and we proactively search new sources all the time. And the third thing we do, and perhaps one of the most important practices we have with our close customers, we collaborate very closely with them to make sure that we add new sources that match their needs and their requirements and requests.
Thank you, Yoav. So someone here asked, how does Lunar grade the risk of the alerts? So the answer composed of two parts. The first part is that Webs gives each post a grade between 1 to 10, a cyber risk post, indicating how cyber risky the post is. This risk is based on the site and on the content, and it's an automatic process that we detect. And the alert, in case you set up an alert and you received, I want to say like 7 posts from that alert in the past 6 hours, for example, then the shown risk in the alert would be an average of all of the risk score we saw in each post. And of course, you have access to, after you see like the summary report of each post, we also, besides the calculated average risk, we also give you the top categories that was detected in the post. We also give you the top sources, the top actors. So it's like a summarized alert. And then you can actually dive in and look at each post at a time, separately see the calculated risk over there as well. So I see another question. Compared to the dark web monitoring tools that exist in the market, what is Lunar's added value? Okay, so I can talk about Lunar's features, and I will. But first of all, I want to talk about what is really important here, and it's the data. Like Yuval mentioned, she's a part of an analyst team that are in charge of Webs collecting the most quality data. So the data Lunar reflects is clean, relevant, and up to date. Regarding the functionality, when creating Lunar, we actually decided to put the analyst workflow in the center, how we can make their job easier. So the entire focus was dedicated to simplicity and easy to use. Just make it fast. And okay, I'm reading the question just a second. Okay, does Webs also include data dumps that are sometimes posted on hackers forums and marketplace to gain attentions and customers? Yes, we have it. We have it both as the data breaches, like Yuval explained. If it's above 20 leaked emails, it will appear as a data breach. And you can also, since we scan all of the posts, if we crawl a hacking form, we will collect the entire phone. So of course we will collect such kind of post. And just a second. Yuval, do you want to show them the AI query builder? Share your screen.
Sure.
We can write something general such as threats to Intel, for example, to see how we can actually generate.
I'll go back. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll quickly ask for threats on, let's say, intel.com.
Okay, so I'll explain while it loads, I'll explain a little bit about it. The AI query generator is actually a tool that we've connected, not like a tool, a part of Lunar that we connected to ChatGPT. It actually learned Web's syntax and it learned how an analyst would potentially write a query. We can see in the query that Yuval just generated, Intel, internal corporations. We taught the AI that they need to use variations of Intel. You can also see the word corporation intel.com. They also use web's specific filters. For example, enriched domain value, which will yield exact values, IOCs in our data, and combine it with threatening keywords.
Eventually, me as an analyst, I would do something very similar. I would try to combine as many company mentions and those variations that might be found on the dark web and mentioned by threat actors, along with risk keywords such as ransomware, malware, etc.
Thank you, Yuval. Just a second, I'm reading more questions. Thank you very much to the person who said it looks great. I think our time is up for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll find our webinar insightful. And any questions that you have about Lunar, reach out and we will be happy to answer.